The helicopter blades chopped through the thick Afghan air as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos clutched her medical kit tighter. At 24, she was the youngest combat medic ever assigned to Delta Force operations, and the weight of that responsibility pressed against her chest like body armor. The other soldiers in the bird barely acknowledged her presence, their eyes hidden behind tactical sunglasses, their minds focused on the mission ahead. Maria had earned her place through grueling training and perfect test scores, but she knew that meant nothing to these elite warriors. They had seen too many medics freeze under pressure, too many who couldn't handle the reality of battlefield medicine. She was still unproven, still green, still an outsider in their brotherhood of steel and blood. The forward operating base materialized below them like a fortress carved from dust and determination. Concrete barriers rose from the earth like broken teeth, topped with razor wire that glinted in the harsh desert sun. Guard towers stood sentinel at each corner, their machine gun nests scanning the horizon for threats that could emerge from any shadow or ridge line. As the helicopter touched down, Maria grabbed her gear and followed the team across the landing zone. The rotor wash kicked up clouds of fine sand that found its way into every crevice of her uniform, her equipment, her lungs. She had trained for this environment, but nothing could truly prepare someone for the relentless heat and the ever-present taste of dust and diesel fuel. The base medical facility was a converted shipping container reinforced with steel plates and sandbags. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over surgical tables that had seen too much action. Dr. Richard Hayes, the chief surgeon, looked up from his paperwork as Maria entered. His gray hair was perfectly styled despite the conditions, and his surgical scrubs bore not a single wrinkle or stain. "So you're the famous Maria Santos," Dr. Hayes said, not looking up from his clipboard. "The one who thinks she can handle special operations medicine." His voice carried the weight of 15 years in military hospitals, 15 years of seeing young medics crack under pressure. "Yes, sir," Maria replied, keeping her voice steady. "Ready to serve, sir." Dr. Hayes finally raised his eyes, studying her with the clinical detachment he usually reserved for examining wounds. "You might have top scores from your training, Sergeant, but this isn't a classroom. Out here, when bullets are flying and men are dying, theory means nothing. Experience means everything." The other medical staff in the container had stopped their work to watch the exchange. Corpsman James Miller, a veteran of 3 deployments, smirked as he organized medical supplies. Nurse Captain Rebecca Stone, who had saved more lives than she could count, shook her head slightly. They had all heard about the young hotshot medic being assigned to their unit, and none of them were impressed. "We've requested experienced medics for months," Dr. Hayes continued, his voice growing colder. "Instead, they send us someone fresh out of advanced training. Do you have any idea what we deal with here, Sergeant?" Maria had studied the casualty reports, had memorized the types of injuries common in special operations. She knew about improvised explosive devices that turned vehicles into twisted metal coffins, about sniper rounds that could punch through body armor, about the horrific wounds that modern warfare could inflict on the human body. But she also knew that talking about knowledge wasn't the same as proving competence. "I understand this is a challenging assignment, sir," she said. "I'm here to learn and to help save lives." Dr. Hayes set down his clipboard and walked closer to Maria, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Learning gets people killed, Sergeant. In my operating room, there's no time for hesitation, no room for uncertainty. These Delta operators are the best soldiers in the world, and they deserve medical care that matches their caliber." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Maria felt every eye on her, measuring her, judging her, finding her wanting. She had faced skepticism before during training, but this was different. This was real, and lives would depend on her performance. "I won't let anyone down, sir," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Dr. Hayes laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's what they all say, Sergeant. We'll see how confident you are when the first casualties start rolling in." The briefing room was filled with the low murmur of serious conversations as the Delta Force operators prepared for their next mission. Major Tom Rodriguez, the commanding officer, stood at the front of the room beside a large tactical map marked with red zones and objective points. His weathered face bore the scars of a dozen previous deployments, and his presence commanded instant respect from every soldier in the room. "Gentlemen," Major Rodriguez began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Tonight's operation is a high-value target elimination in the Karangal Valley. Intelligence indicates a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces has been located in a compound approximately 15 clicks from our position." The soldiers leaned forward, their attention focused completely on the mission details. These were professionals who understood that preparation could mean the difference between coming home and being carried home. They studied every aspect of the planned operation, memorizing escape routes, identifying potential ambush sites, calculating ammunition requirements. "The target compound is heavily fortified," Major Rodriguez continued, pointing to aerial photographs pinned to the tactical board. "We can expect significant resistance, including possible RPG and heavy machine gun positions. The mission timeline is tight. We need to be in and out before enemy reinforcements can respond." Staff Sergeant Carlos Mendez, the team's senior non-commissioned officer, raised his hand. "Sir, what's our medical support for this operation?" His question carried special weight because he had been wounded twice in previous deployments and understood the importance of quality battlefield medicine. "We'll have our new medic, Sergeant Santos, providing medical support," Major Rodriguez replied. "She's fresh from advanced training and highly rated by her instructors." A wave of barely concealed concern rippled through the room. These operators had worked with experienced medics before, professionals who could perform surgery in a foxhole while under enemy fire. The idea of depending on someone unproven in combat made them uncomfortable. Sergeant First Class Mike Thompson, a veteran sniper with ice-blue eyes and steady hands, spoke up from the back of the room. "Sir, with respect, shouldn't we have someone with more field experience for this type of operation?" Major Rodriguez understood his men's concerns, but he also knew that every medic had to start somewhere. "Sergeant Santos has exemplary training records and comes highly recommended. She'll be supported by our experienced team, and Dr. Hayes will be available for backup if needed." The soldiers exchanged glances that spoke volumes without words. They trusted their commanding officer completely, but that didn't mean they had to like every decision he made. In special operations, trust had to be earned through performance under fire, not through training certificates or recommendation letters. "The insertion will be by helicopter at 0300 hours, Major Rodriguez continued, moving the briefing back to tactical details. "Weather reports indicate clear skies with minimal wind, which should give us good visibility and stable flying conditions for the pilots." The mission planning session continued for another hour as the team went through every detail of the operation. They studied satellite imagery, reviewed intelligence reports, and coordinated with air support units. Each soldier knew his role precisely, understood how his actions would affect the entire team's success or failure. As the briefing concluded, the soldiers began preparing their equipment with the methodical precision that came from years of experience. They cleaned their weapons, checked their ammunition, tested their communication equipment, and organized their medical supplies. Every piece of gear could mean the difference between life and death in combat. Maria watched from the edge of the room as the Delta operators prepared for the mission. She had attended similar briefings during training, but the atmosphere here was different. These men carried themselves with a quiet confidence that came from surviving countless dangerous operations. They moved with economic efficiency, wasting no motion, no energy, no time on unnecessary activities. Sergeant First Class Thompson approached her as she organized her medical kit. His pale eyes studied her equipment with professional interest, noting the advanced trauma supplies, the emergency surgical instruments, the sophisticated monitoring devices that could mean the difference between saving a life and losing it. "You ever work on a gunshot wound, Santos?" he asked, his voice neutral but probing. "During training simulations, Sergeant," Maria replied honestly. "I've had extensive practice with trauma scenarios, including penetrating wounds and explosive injuries." Thompson nodded slowly, but his expression remained skeptical. "Simulations are good for learning procedures, but they can't replicate the stress of real combat. When bullets are flying and your patients are screaming, everything changes. Your hands shake, your vision narrows, your hearing gets muffled. The training dummies don't bleed real blood or cry for their mothers. Maria felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her voice steady. I understand that combat medicine is different from training, Sergeant. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to take care of the team. We'll see, Thompson said simply, then walked away to continue his mission preparations. The hours before a special operations mission stretched like an eternity for those waiting to deploy. The soldiers had completed their equipment checks, reviewed their contingency plans, and studied their target intelligence until they could navigate the objective area blindfolded. Now came the hardest part, the waiting. Maria spent the time reviewing medical procedures in her head, visualizing different trauma scenarios and her responses to them. She had trained for penetrating chest wounds, massive hemorrhaging, traumatic amputations, and dozens of other combat injuries. Her instructors had drilled her relentlessly until her responses became automatic, muscle memory that could function even under extreme stress. The medical bay was quiet except for the steady hum of the air conditioning unit that fought a losing battle against the Afghan heat. Maria checked and rechecked her supplies, ensuring that every bandage, every medication, every piece of equipment was properly organized and readily accessible. In combat, seconds could mean the difference between saving a life and losing it. Dr. Hayes entered the medical bay as Maria was organizing her trauma kit for the third time. He watched her work for several minutes, noting the precision with which she arranged her supplies, the care she took to ensure everything was properly secured for transport. "Nervous, Sergeant?" he asked, his tone less hostile than it had been earlier. "Focused, sir," Maria replied, "making sure I'm prepared for whatever might happen out there." Dr. Hayes picked up one of her trauma bandages, examining the packaging and expiration date. "You know, Santos, I've seen a lot of young medics come through here over the years. Some of them had all the right training, all the best intentions, all the highest scores from their instructors." He paused, setting the bandage back down in its precisely designated location in her kit. But when the shooting started, when wounded soldiers started coming through that door, some of them froze. They couldn't handle the reality of battlefield medicine, the chaos and the blood and the responsibility of having someone's life in their hands. Maria looked up from her equipment, meeting Dr. Hayes' tired eyes. What separated the ones who succeeded from the ones who failed? The successful ones understood that medicine in combat isn't about perfect technique or textbook procedures, Dr. Hayes said. It's about making life or death decisions with incomplete information under impossible conditions. It's about staying calm when everything around you is falling apart. He walked to the window and looked out at the darkening sky. Soon, helicopters would carry brave soldiers into danger, and some of those soldiers might come back wounded, broken, dying. The responsibility for saving them would fall to people like Maria, people who had trained for years but never faced the ultimate test of combat. "I've been hard on you, Sergeant," Dr. Hayes continued, "because I've seen what happens when inexperienced medics make mistakes under pressure. Good soldiers die because someone wasn't ready, wasn't trained enough, wasn't strong enough to handle the responsibility." Maria stood up from her equipment check, her back straight and her eyes clear. "I won't let anyone down, sir. I know I'm unproven. I know I'm young. But I'm ready to do whatever it takes to bring these soldiers home alive." Dr. Hayes turned back to face her, and, for the first time, his expression softened slightly. "I hope you're right, Santos. For all our sakes, I hope you're right." The call came at 0247 hours, 13 minutes before the scheduled mission departure. Maria was lying on her narrow bunk, fully dressed and ready to deploy, when the base alarm began its urgent wailing. The sound cut through the night like a blade, bringing every soldier to instant alertness. All medical personnel to the landing zone immediately. The voice over the intercom was crisp and professional, but Maria could hear the underlying tension. "Incoming casualties from Operation Nightfall. Multiple wounded, priority medevac in progress." Maria grabbed her medical kit and ran toward the landing zone, her boots pounding against the gravel path between buildings. The base had transformed from sleepy routine to controlled chaos in seconds. Soldiers ran to predetermined positions, vehicles started their engines, and Floodlights illuminated the helicopter landing area with harsh white light. The medevac helicopter approached from the east, its navigation lights cutting through the darkness like fireflies against the star-filled sky. The sound of its rotors grew louder as it descended, bringing wounded soldiers back from a mission that had gone terribly wrong. Dr. Hayes was already at the landing zone when Maria arrived, along with Corpsman Miller and 2 other medical technicians. They had brought a stretcher team and emergency medical equipment, prepared for the worst-case scenarios that special operations could produce. "What's the situation, sir?" Maria asked as they waited for the helicopter to land. 3 casualties from Delta Team Bravo, Dr. Hayes shouted over the increasing rotor noise. 1 urgent surgical, 2 priority. They were conducting a reconnaissance mission when they walked into an ambush. Heavy small arms fire and at least 1 improvised explosive device. The helicopter touched down with practiced precision, its crew chief immediately jumping out to help transfer the wounded soldiers. The first casualty was Staff Sergeant David Kim, a communications specialist with 15 years of military service. Blood soaked through the field dressings on his chest and abdomen, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. Maria felt her training take over as she helped load Kim onto a stretcher. Her hands moved automatically to check his pulse, assess his breathing, evaluate the severity of his wounds. The theoretical knowledge from countless hours of study merged with muscle memory from endless practice scenarios. Multiple penetrating wounds to the chest and abdomen, the flight medic reported as they rushed toward the medical facility. Blood pressure dropping, possible internal bleeding. He's been unconscious for the last 10 minutes. The second casualty was Specialist Robert Chun, a weapons expert who had taken shrapnel from an improvised explosive device. His left leg was mangled below the knee, held together by field dressings and determination. Despite his injuries, he remained conscious and alert, gritting his teeth against pain that would have overwhelmed most people. "My leg's pretty messed up," Chin said through clenched teeth as they loaded him onto a stretcher, "but I can still feel my toes." "That's good, right?" "That's very good," Maria assured him, quickly assessing the extent of his injuries. The wounds were serious, but not immediately life-threatening if they could control the bleeding and prevent infection. The third casualty was the one that made Maria's heart skip a beat. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, the Delta Force commander who had led more successful special operations than any other officer in the military, lay unconscious on the stretcher with a massive head wound that had soaked his helmet liner with blood. Morrison was a legend among Special Operations Forces, a soldier who had earned 3 Silver Stars and a Medal of Honor during his 20-year career. He had led soldiers through impossible situations and brought them home alive when other commanders would have written them off as casualties. Severe head trauma from explosive blast, the flight medic reported. Possible skull fracture, definite concussion, been unconscious since the incident. Vital signs are stable, but he's completely unresponsive. As they rushed the casualties into the medical facility, Maria felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. These weren't training dummies or simulation casualties. They were real soldiers with families, with friends, with futures that depended on her ability to provide competent medical care under pressure. The medical facility erupted into controlled chaos as the trauma team went to work. Dr. Hayes immediately took charge of Staff Sergeant Kim's treatment, barking orders for blood products, surgical instruments, and emergency medications. Corpsman Miller began working on Specialist Chin's leg wounds, cleaning debris, and assessing the extent of the damage. "Santos," Dr. Hayes called out without looking up from his patient. "Take Morrison, monitor his vitals, assess his neurological status, and keep him stable until I can get to him." Maria felt every eye in the room watching her as she approached the unconscious Delta commander. This was her moment of truth, the test that would determine whether she belonged in Special Operations Medicine or should be transferred back to a regular unit. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison lay motionless on the examination table, his breathing steady but his eyes closed. The wound on his head had been cleaned and bandaged by the flight medic, but Maria could see that significant swelling had already begun. Head injuries were among the most unpredictable trauma cases, capable of changing from stable to critical in seconds. Maria began her assessment with practiced efficiency, checking Morrison's pupils for signs of brain injury, testing his reflexes for neurological damage, monitoring his blood pressure for signs of increased intracranial pressure. Her hands moved steadily despite the magnitude of treating such a renowned soldier. Pupils are equal and reactive, she reported to Dr. Hayes, who was still working frantically on Staff Sergeant Kim. Blood pressure stable at 120/80, heart rate steady at 68. No obvious signs of increased intracranial pressure at this time. As she worked, Maria became aware of hushed conversations around the medical facility. Word had spread quickly that Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had been wounded, and soldiers throughout the base were asking about his condition. Morrison wasn't just any Delta commander. He was the Delta commander, the soldier that other special operations forces looked to for leadership and inspiration. The pressure was enormous, but Maria forced herself to focus on the medical facts rather than the patient's identity. A head injury was a head injury, regardless of whether the patient was a private or a legendary colonel. The anatomy was the same, the physiology was the same, the treatment protocols were the same. "How's Morrison looking, Santos?" Dr. Hayes asked during a brief lull in Kim's treatment. "Stable for now, sir," Maria replied. "But head injuries can deteriorate quickly. We should consider a medevac to the trauma center in Germany if his condition changes." Dr. Hayes nodded approvingly. It was exactly the recommendation he would have made, the appropriate balance between caution and optimism that marked good battlefield medicine. Hours passed as the medical team worked to stabilize all 3 casualties. Staff Sergeant Kim required emergency surgery to repair internal bleeding, a delicate procedure performed in less than ideal conditions. Specialist Chin's leg wounds were cleaned, debrided, and temporarily stabilized pending transfer to a facility with advanced orthopedic capabilities. Throughout the night, Maria maintained her vigil over Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, monitoring his condition for any signs of deterioration. She checked his pupils every 15 minutes, tested his reflexes every hour, and watched his vital signs for the subtle changes that could indicate a worsening brain injury. As dawn began to break over the Afghan mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Morrison's eyes suddenly opened. Maria was adjusting his 4-line when she noticed the change, and she immediately began her neurological assessment. "Colonel Morrison, can you hear me?" she asked, shining a penlight into his eyes to check his pupil response. Morrison blinked several times, his eyes slowly focusing on Maria's face. His expression was confused, disoriented, but he was clearly conscious and attempting to process his surroundings. Where am I?" Morrison asked, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "You're at Forward Operating Base Chapman, sir," Maria replied, her voice steady and professional. "You were injured during a mission, but you're safe now. Do you remember what happened?" Morrison tried to sit up, but Maria gently pushed him back down onto the examination table. "Easy, sir. You have a head injury and need to stay still. Can you tell me your name and today's date?" "I'm Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison," he said slowly, as if the words were difficult to form. "Today is, I'm not sure about today. Tuesday? Wednesday? Everything's a little fuzzy." Maria made notes on his chart while continuing her assessment. The fact that Morrison could state his name and rank was encouraging, but the confusion about the date indicated possible short-term memory issues common with concussions. "Sir, I need to test your reflexes and coordination," Maria explained, producing a small rubber hammer from her medical kit. "This might feel strange, but it helps me assess how your brain is functioning after the injury." As she worked through the neurological tests, Maria became aware that Dr. Hayes had finished with his other patients and was watching her examine Morrison. She could feel his scrutiny like a physical weight, but she continued with her systematic evaluation. "Reflexes are symmetric and normal," she reported to Dr. Hayes. "Coordination is slightly impaired, consistent with mild to moderate concussion. Cognitive function appears intact, but with some short-term memory gaps." Dr. Hayes approached the examination table and looked down at Morrison, who was now more alert, but still obviously disoriented. "How are you feeling, Colonel?" "Like I got kicked by a mule," Morrison replied, managing a weak smile. "But better than I probably should, considering what happened." "What do you remember about the mission?" Dr. Hayes asked, pulling up a chair beside the examination table. Morrison closed his eyes, concentrating on piecing together fragmented memories. We were conducting reconnaissance on a suspected weapons cache. Everything seemed normal until the world exploded. IED, I think. Then, everything went black. Maria continued monitoring Morrison's vital signs while Dr. Hayes conducted his examination. The colonel's condition appeared stable, but head injuries were notoriously unpredictable. Patients could seem fine for hours before suddenly deteriorating into life-threatening situations. "Colonel," Dr. Hayes said, his voice serious, "you have a significant concussion, possibly with mild traumatic brain injury. We're going to keep you under observation for at least 24 hours. And if your condition changes at all, we'll arrange for immediate evacuation to Germany." Morrison nodded slowly, then winced as the movement aggravated his headache. "What about my men? Kim and Chun, how are they?" "Both stable," Dr. Hayes replied. "Kim required surgery for internal injuries, but he's going to be fine. Chun has significant leg wounds, but we've got them under control. They're both going to make full recoveries." Relief washed over Morrison's face, and for the first time since regaining consciousness, he seemed to relax. The welfare of his soldiers was clearly his primary concern, more important to him than his own injuries. As the morning progressed, Maria continued her careful monitoring of Morrison's condition. She checked his neurological responses every hour, watched for signs of increased intracranial pressure, and made detailed notes about his recovery progress. Around midday, Morrison asked for water, and Maria helped him take small sips from a cup. His coordination had improved significantly since the morning, and his memory seemed to be returning in bits and pieces. "You're the new medic," Morrison said, studying Maria's face. "Santos, right? I remember seeing you at the briefing yesterday." "Yes, sir." Staff Sergeant Maria Santos. Morrison was quiet for a moment, then asked, "How long have you been in special operations, Sergeant?" Maria felt her chest tighten, but she answered honestly, "This is my first assignment with Delta Force, sir. I completed advanced medical training 6 weeks ago." Morrison raised an eyebrow, then winced as the expression aggravated his headache. "Your first assignment? And they put you on a special operations medical team?" "Yes, sir. I know I'm inexperienced, but I'm committed to providing the best possible care for everyone on the team." Morrison studied her for a long moment, his experienced eyes taking in details that most people would miss. He had commanded soldiers for 20 years, and he had developed an instinct for reading people, for understanding their character and capabilities. "You've been taking care of me all night," he said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. "Yes, sir. Dr. Hayes was performing emergency surgery on Staff Sergeant Kim, so I was assigned to monitor your condition." Morrison nodded slowly, processing this information. "And what's your assessment of my condition, Sergeant?" Maria straightened her shoulders and gave him the same professional evaluation she would give to any medical officer. "You suffered a significant concussion with possible mild traumatic brain injury. Your vital signs have remained stable throughout the night. Your neurological responses have improved steadily, and your cognitive function appears to be returning to normal. I recommend continued observation for another 12 to 24 hours to ensure no delayed complications develop." "That's exactly what Dr. Hayes told me," Morrison said with a slight smile. "Seems like your assessment was right on target." The validation from both the chief surgeon and the Delta commander was more meaningful to Maria than any training certificate or commendation letter. She had proven herself capable under pressure, demonstrated competence in real-world battlefield medicine. As the afternoon wore on, Morrison continued to improve. His memory gaps filled in, his coordination returned to normal, and his headache decreased from severe to merely annoying. Dr. Hayes conducted another thorough examination and pronounced himself satisfied with the colonel's progress. "You're a lucky man, Morrison," Dr. Hayes said as he completed his assessment. "A few inches different, and that blast could have killed you. As it is, you should make a complete recovery with no lasting effects." "I don't feel particularly lucky," Morrison replied, "but I'm grateful to be alive. And grateful for the excellent medical care." His eyes met Maria's as he spoke, and She understood that his gratitude extended to her efforts throughout the long night of monitoring and treatment. The day shift medical staff arrived to take over patient care, giving Maria her first opportunity to rest since the casualties had arrived. She was exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination, but also exhilarated by the knowledge that she had successfully handled her first real combat medical emergency. As she prepared to leave the medical facility, Dr. Hayes approached her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Santos, I owe you an apology." Maria looked up in surprise. "Sir, I was hard on you when you arrived. I doubted your capabilities, questioned your readiness for special operations medicine. But you proved yourself last night. You handled a high-pressure situation with professionalism and competence." The acknowledgement meant more to Maria than she could express. Earning the respect of Dr. Hayes was like earning a battlefield commission. It couldn't be given, only earned through performance under fire. "Thank you, sir. I just did what I was trained to do." Dr. Hayes shook his head. "No, Santos. You did more than that. Training teaches procedures and protocols. What you showed last night was judgment, composure, and the kind of instinct that can't be taught in any classroom." As Maria finally headed to her quarters for some much-needed rest, she reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. She had arrived at the base as an unproven novice, dismissed by the surgical team and doubted by the soldiers she was supposed to serve. But when the test came, when real lives hung in the balance, she had risen to the challenge. The green medic, who had been laughed at just one day earlier, had proven herself worthy of the trust that special operations soldiers placed in their medical support. She had taken care of a legendary Delta commander during his darkest hours and helped ensure his recovery. But Maria knew that this was just the beginning. Special operations medicine demanded constant excellence, unwavering competence under the most extreme conditions imaginable. She had passed her first test, but many more would follow. As she finally lay down on her narrow bunk, Maria smiled for the first time since arriving at the base. She had earned her place among the elite medical professionals who served the world's most elite soldiers. The surgeons weren't laughing anymore. 6 weeks had passed since Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's injury, and the dynamics within the medical unit had shifted dramatically. Maria Santos was no longer the untested newcomer who faced skeptical glances and whispered doubts. She had become an integral part of the medical team, her competence proven through a series of successful treatments under increasingly challenging conditions. The medical facility buzzed with its usual controlled chaos as Maria reviewed patient files from the previous night's operations. 3 soldiers had returned with minor injuries from a reconnaissance mission, nothing serious, but each case required careful attention to prevent complications. The routine nature of these treatments was almost disappointing after the intensity of her first major trauma case. Dr. Hayes entered the medical bay carrying his morning coffee and the daily casualty reports from across the theater of operations. His attitude toward Maria had transformed completely since Morrison's recovery. He now sought her opinions on treatment protocols and included her in decision-making processes that had previously been reserved for more senior staff. "Morning, Santos," Dr. Hayes said, settling into his desk chair. "How are our patients from last night?" "All stable, sir," Maria replied, looking up from her paperwork. "Private Johnson's shrapnel wounds are healing cleanly, Sergeant Williams' burns are responding well to treatment, and Corporal Davis should be cleared for light duty by tomorrow." Dr. Hayes nodded approvingly. Maria's post-treatment care had become exemplary, characterized by thorough attention to detail and proactive prevention of complications. Her patients consistently showed faster recovery times and fewer post-treatment issues than the statistical averages. "I've been thinking about expanding your responsibilities," Dr. Hayes said, sipping his coffee thoughtfully. "You've demonstrated exceptional competence in trauma care, and I'd like to see how you handle some of the more complex cases we encounter." The opportunity for increased responsibility was exactly what Maria had hoped for, but she wanted to ensure she was truly ready for the challenge. "What type of cases are you considering, sir?" "Advanced trauma surgery, for starters," Dr. Hayes replied. "I know your training included surgical procedures, and I've seen your suture work. With proper supervision initially, I think you could handle emergency operations when I'm not available." The prospect of performing surgery in a combat environment was both thrilling and terrifying. Maria had practiced extensively during training, but actual battlefield surgery carried risks and responsibilities that simulations could never fully replicate. "I'd welcome the opportunity, sir," she said. "I want to contribute as much as possible to the mission." Dr. Hayes smiled, remembering his own early days as a military surgeon when every new responsibility felt like a mountain to climb. "Good. We'll start with supervised procedures and work up to independent operations. The soldiers deserve medical care that matches their courage." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who entered the medical facility with his usual commanding presence. His recovery had been remarkable, complete cognitive function restored, no lasting effects from the concussion, and a return to full-duty status that impressed even the most experienced military physicians. "Good morning, Dr. Hayes, Sergeant Santos," Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority that had made him one of the most respected officers in special operations. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all, Colonel," Dr. Hayes replied, standing to shake Morrison's hand. "What can we do for you today?" Morrison's expression grew serious as he looked between the doctor and Maria. "I wanted to discuss Sergeant Santos' performance and make a request regarding her assignment to my unit." Maria felt her pulse quicken, uncertain whether Morrison's visit indicated approval or concern about her medical care. The Delta commander's opinion carried enormous weight throughout the special operations community, and his assessment could significantly impact her career trajectory. "Sergeant Santos provided exceptional medical care during my injury," Morrison continued. "Her monitoring throughout the night, her clinical assessments, and her professional demeanor under pressure were exactly what I would expect from the most experienced combat medics in our military." Dr. Hayes glanced at Maria with obvious pride. "She's exceeded all my expectations, Colonel. Her technical skills are excellent, but more importantly, she demonstrates the judgment and composure necessary for special operations medicine." Morrison nodded, but his expression remained serious. "That's exactly why I'm here. I have a mission coming up that requires embedded medical support, and I specifically want Sergeant Santos on my team." The request was simultaneously an honor and a challenge. Embedded medical support meant deploying directly with combat units, providing medical care under fire, treating casualties in hostile territory where evacuation might be impossible. It was the most demanding assignment a military medic could receive. "What type of operation, Colonel?" Dr. Hayes asked, his professional instincts already calculating the medical requirements and risks involved. "Deep reconnaissance behind enemy lines," Morrison replied. 2 weeks in contested territory, limited communication, no possibility of medevac support for the first 10 days. We need a medic who can handle anything that comes up with whatever supplies they can carry. The mission parameters were exactly the type of assignment that separated truly elite medics from those who were merely competent. Limited supplies, no backup support, extended duration in hostile territory. It was a test of skill, endurance, and mental toughness that few medical professionals could pass. "It's a significant responsibility," Dr. Hayes said, looking at Maria. "Are you interested in this assignment, Sergeant?" Maria felt her heart racing, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, sir. I'd consider it an honor to serve with Colonel Morrison's team." Morrison studied her carefully, his experienced eyes evaluating her response. "This isn't like the medical facility here, Santos. Out there, you'll be the only medical professional available. If someone gets hurt, if someone gets sick, if someone needs emergency surgery, it's all on you. No backup, no consultation, no second chances." The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but Maria had trained her entire career for exactly this type of challenge. "I understand, sir. I'm prepared for whatever the mission requires." "Good," Morrison said with a slight smile. "Because my soldiers' lives will depend on your competence. I don't make requests for untested personnel, but I've seen what you can do under pressure." Dr. Hayes cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the practical considerations. "Colonel, if Santos is going to be your embedded medic, we need to discuss medical supply requirements and emergency protocols. 2 weeks without resupply means careful planning and efficient resource management. The three of them spent the next hour reviewing mission parameters, discussing medical supply requirements, and developing contingency plans for various casualty scenarios. Maria took detailed notes, asking questions about equipment limitations and treatment priorities under field conditions. Weight is critical, Morrison explained, reviewing the supply list. Every ounce matters when you're carrying everything on your back for 2 weeks. We need maximum medical capability with minimum weight and bulk. Maria studied the proposed equipment list, mentally calculating the trade-offs between comprehensive medical supplies and practical portability. Sir, I can reduce the surgical kit by about 30% if I focus on the most essential instruments. The trauma supplies are already optimized for weight. Morrison nodded approvingly. Excellent. What about emergency medications? Pain management will be critical if we have casualties, but can't evacuate immediately. I can carry a full range of pain medications and antibiotics, Maria replied, plus emergency cardiac drugs and advanced trauma pharmaceuticals. Total weight would be about 15 pounds for the complete medical kit. Dr. Hayes looked impressed by her preparation. That's excellent planning, Santos. You're thinking like an experienced field medic already. The mission briefing continued with discussions of communication protocols, evacuation procedures, and worst-case scenario planning. Morrison wanted to ensure that Maria understood every aspect of the operation, from the tactical objectives to the environmental challenges they would face. The operational area is mountainous terrain at high altitude, Morrison explained, pointing to a topographic map. Temperatures can drop below freezing at night, even in summer. Dehydration and altitude sickness are real concerns, in addition to combat injuries. Maria made additional notes about environmental medical concerns. High-altitude operations required special consideration for fluid management, medication dosing, and wound healing rates. Sir, should I include altitude sickness medications and enhanced hydration supplies? Definitely, Morrison replied. Prevention is always better than treatment, especially when treatment options are limited. As the briefing concluded, Dr. Hayes stood and shook Morrison's hand. Colonel, I'm confident that Sergeant Santos will provide excellent medical support for your mission. She's proven herself capable of handling whatever challenges arise. Morrison turned to Maria, his expression serious but respectful. Sergeant, this mission will test every aspect of your medical training and personal character. I'm counting on you to keep my soldiers healthy and bring them home alive. Do you have any concerns or questions about the assignment? Maria met his gaze directly, her voice clear and confident. No concerns, sir. I'm ready to serve with your team and provide whatever medical support is required. Good, Morrison said with a firm nod. We deploy in 72 hours. Use that time to finalize your medical preparations and get some rest. Once we're in the field, rest will be a luxury we can't afford. After Morrison left the medical facility, Dr. Hayes turned to Maria with a mixture of pride and concern. This is a significant opportunity, Santos. Success on this mission will establish your reputation throughout the special operations community. And failure? Maria asked, though she already knew the answer. Failure isn't an option, Dr. Hayes replied bluntly. These soldiers are depending on you. Their families are depending on you. The mission success might depend on your ability to keep the team healthy and combat ready. Maria spent the rest of the day reviewing her medical supplies and equipment, ensuring that every item served multiple purposes and contributed to maximum medical capability within strict weight limitations. She studied advanced trauma procedures, reviewed high-altitude medical protocols, and mentally rehearsed emergency scenarios she might encounter. That evening, she received a visit from Staff Sergeant Kim, who had made a complete recovery from his combat injuries 6 weeks earlier. His surgical wounds had healed perfectly, and he had been cleared for full-duty status ahead of his expected recovery timeline. Sergeant Santos, Kim said as he entered the medical facility. I heard you're deploying with Colonel Morrison's team. I wanted to thank you for taking care of me when I was wounded. Maria looked up from her equipment preparation, surprised by the visit. Just doing my job, Sergeant. I'm glad you've made such a good recovery. Kim shook his head. It was more than just doing your job. I remember pieces of that night, even though I was barely conscious most of the time. You were professional, competent, and calm when everything was chaos. That kind of medical care makes the difference between going home and not going home. The recognition from a soldier she had treated meant more to Maria than any official commendation could. These Delta operators didn't give praise lightly, and their respect had to be earned through demonstrated competence under pressure. The colonel is lucky to have you on his team, Kim continued. If something happens out there, I know you'll take care of everyone the same way you took care of me. After Kim left, Maria continued her mission preparations with renewed confidence. She had proven herself capable of handling trauma cases, earned the respect of her medical colleagues and the soldiers she served, and now faced the ultimate test of embedded combat operations. Corpsman Miller entered the medical bay as Maria was conducting her final equipment check. His attitude toward her had also transformed dramatically since her successful treatment of Morrison and the other casualties. Where once he had been skeptical and dismissive, he was now respectful and supportive. Need any help with your gear prep? Miller asked, examining the medical supplies organized on Maria's work table. I think I've got everything covered, Maria replied. But I'd appreciate a second opinion on my supply priorities. Miller reviewed her equipment selection with the eye of someone who had deployed on multiple special operations missions. His experience with field medicine complemented Maria's advanced training, and his suggestions helped optimize her loadout for maximum effectiveness. You might want to add more suture material, Miller suggested. In the field, you never know when you'll need to close multiple wounds, and running out of sutures is a nightmare scenario. Maria made the adjustment, reorganizing her surgical supplies to accommodate the additional sutures. Good catch. Anything else you'd recommend? Your antibiotic selection looks good, but consider adding some antidiarrheal medication, Miller said with a slight smile. It's not glamorous, but gastrointestinal issues can take soldiers out of action just as effectively as combat injuries. The practical wisdom from Miller's deployment experience was exactly the type of insight that military medical training sometimes overlooked. Academic preparation was essential, but field experience provided knowledge that could only be gained through actual operations. Thanks, Miller, Maria said. I appreciate the advice. You've earned your place on this team, Santos, Miller replied. 6 weeks ago, I wasn't sure you could handle the pressure. But you've proven yourself again and again. Colonel Morrison wouldn't request you for this mission if he didn't have complete confidence in your abilities. As the evening progressed, Maria completed her final preparations and tried to get some rest before the mission deployment. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of mountain landscapes and wounded soldiers, scenarios that her subconscious mind rehearsed endlessly. At 0500 hours, she was awakened by the familiar sound of helicopters approaching the base. The insertion aircraft for Morrison's mission had arrived, and, within hours, she would be deployed into contested territory where her medical skills would face their ultimate test. Maria dressed quickly and gathered her equipment, checking each item one final time before securing everything in her tactical medical pack. The weight distribution felt comfortable, balanced between her body armor and combat load, optimized for extended movement through difficult terrain. The pre-mission briefing was held in the secure conference room where she had first met Morrison weeks earlier. The Delta team consisted of 12 elite soldiers, each a specialist in particular aspects of special operations warfare. Maria was the 13th member, responsible for keeping the other 12 healthy and combat effective throughout the mission. Gentlemen, Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority that commanded instant attention from every soldier in the room. Today we begin a 2-week reconnaissance operation in some of the most challenging terrain and hostile territory in Afghanistan. The mission parameters were daunting. Deep penetration behind enemy lines, limited communication with headquarters, no possibility of reinforcement or evacuation for the first 10 days. Success depended entirely on the team's skills, equipment, and ability to operate independently in hostile territory. Medical support will be provided by Sergeant Santos, Morrison continued, gesturing toward Maria. She's proven herself capable under pressure and has my complete confidence. If anyone gets hurt, if anyone gets sick, she's your lifeline to staying mission capable. The soldiers studied Maria with professional interest, evaluating her equipment, her demeanor, her apparent readiness for the challenges ahead. These were men who had deployed on dozens of special operations missions, and they understood the critical importance of competent medical support. Sergeant First Class Thompson, the sniper who had questioned Maria's readiness weeks earlier, spoke up from the back of the room. Sergeant Santos, what's your assessment of high-altitude medical challenges for this mission? Maria stood and addressed the team directly, her voice clear and confident. The operational area reaches elevations of over 10,000 feet, which increases risks of altitude sickness, dehydration, and slower wound healing. I'm carrying medications for altitude sickness prevention and treatment, enhanced hydration supplies, and modified wound care protocols for high-altitude conditions. Thompson nodded approvingly. And if we take casualties in a position where immediate evacuation is impossible, I'm prepared to perform emergency surgery under field conditions if necessary, Maria replied. My medical kit includes advanced trauma supplies and surgical instruments. Obviously, evacuation to a proper medical facility would be preferable, but I can handle life-threatening injuries in the field if required. The team's acceptance of her capabilities was evident in their questions and responses. They weren't challenging her competence anymore. They were gathering information they needed to understand their medical support capabilities for mission planning purposes. Equipment weight and resupply considerations? Asked Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the team's senior non-commissioned officer. Total medical equipment weight is just under 15 pounds, Maria responded. Supplies are calculated for 14 days with no resupply, including contingency reserves for multiple casualty scenarios. If we face extended operations beyond 14 days, we'll need to consider medical resupply or evacuation. Morrison reviewed the final mission details, covering insertion procedures, communication schedules, and extraction planning. The complexity of the operation was staggering, requiring precise coordination between multiple military units and careful timing to avoid enemy detection. Final equipment checks in 30 minutes. Morrison announced as the briefing concluded. We deploy at 0800 hours. Questions? The room was silent. These were professionals who had prepared thoroughly for the mission ahead. Equipment was ready, procedures were understood, contingencies were planned. All that remained was execution. As the soldiers dispersed to conduct their final preparations, Morrison approached Maria privately. This is it, Santos. Everything we've discussed, everything you've trained for, it all comes down to the next 2 weeks. Maria felt the weight of responsibility, but also the confidence that came from thorough preparation and proven competence. I'm ready, sir. I won't let the team down. Morrison smiled, the expression of a commander who had complete confidence in his soldiers. I know you won't. That's why you're here. At precisely 0800 hours, the Delta team boarded their insertion helicopter for the flight into contested territory. Maria took her designated seat and secured her medical equipment, checking one final time that everything was properly organized and readily accessible. As the helicopter lifted off from the base and turned toward the mountains, Maria looked out at the rugged landscape that would be her home for the next 2 weeks. Somewhere in those mountains, her medical skills would face their ultimate test. The Green Medic, who had been doubted just weeks earlier, was now an integral part of one of the most elite military units in the world. The helicopter flew deeper into enemy territory, carrying 13 soldiers toward a mission that would test every aspect of their training, their equipment, and their character. For Maria Santos, it represented the culmination of years of preparation and the beginning of her emergence as one of the military's premier special operations medics. The mountains grew larger as they approached their insertion point, snow-capped peaks rising into thin air where breathing would be difficult and medical challenges would be magnified. But Maria felt ready for whatever lay ahead. She had earned her place on this team through competence demonstrated under pressure, and she was determined to prove that their confidence in her abilities was completely justified. The helicopter descended through swirling mountain mist toward a landing zone barely large enough to accommodate the aircraft. Jagged peaks surrounded them on all sides, their snow-covered summits disappearing into low-hanging clouds that seemed to press down like a gray ceiling. Maria felt her ears pop as they lost altitude, the thin air already affecting her breathing even before they reached their insertion point. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison sat across from her in the cramped passenger compartment, his face impassive as he studied the terrain through the small window. The other Delta operators maintained their usual professional composure, but Maria could sense the underlying tension that accompanied every high-risk mission insertion. 2 minutes, the crew chief shouted over the rotor noise, holding up 2 fingers to ensure everyone understood the time remaining before insertion. Maria checked her medical equipment one final time, ensuring that everything was properly secured for the fast rope descent to the landing zone. Her medical pack felt heavier than during training exercises, the weight of real responsibility adding psychological mass to the physical load. The helicopter flared hard as it approached the narrow mountain ledge that would serve as their insertion point. Through the open door, Maria could see loose rocks and scattered boulders covering the improvised landing zone, evidence of the frequent rock slides that plagued these steep mountain slopes. Go, 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 the crew chief shouted as the aircraft touched down with a jarring impact that rattled every piece of equipment in the passenger compartment. The Delta team moved with practiced efficiency, each soldier grabbing his equipment and exiting the helicopter in predetermined order. Maria followed Morrison toward the door, her medical pack bouncing against her back as she moved quickly across the uneven deck. The moment her boots touched the rocky ground, Maria felt the thin mountain air bite into her lungs. At over 9,000 feet elevation, every breath contained significantly less oxygen than her body was accustomed to. The physical effects of high altitude would become more pronounced over the next several hours as their systems adjusted to the reduced atmospheric pressure. The helicopter lifted off immediately after the last soldier cleared the aircraft, its rotor wash kicking up clouds of gritty dust and small stones. Within seconds, the aircraft disappeared into the gray mountain mist, leaving 13 soldiers alone in some of the most hostile and unforgiving terrain on Earth. Morrison immediately took charge of the team, his voice barely audible over the wind that howled through the mountain passes. Move to the rally point. Watch your footing on these rocks. The last thing we need is a twisted ankle 5 minutes into the mission. The team moved carefully across the treacherous terrain, each step requiring attention to loose stones and hidden crevices that could trap an unwary foot. Maria stayed close to the center of the formation, her medical training making her acutely aware of the injury potential in this environment. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, walking point for the team, suddenly raised his fist in the universal military signal for halt. Every soldier immediately froze in place, weapons ready, senses alert for whatever threat Rodriguez had detected. Movement, 2 o'clock, about 300 meters, Rodriguez whispered into his radio microphone. Looks like a small patrol, maybe 3 or 4 individuals. Morrison crawled forward to Rodriguez's position and studied the distant figures through high-powered binoculars. Local militia, probably a routine patrol. They haven't spotted us yet, but we need to avoid contact if possible. The team remained motionless for nearly 20 minutes as the enemy patrol moved slowly through the valley below their position. Maria used the time to monitor her own physical response to the altitude, noting the increased heart rate and slightly labored breathing that indicated her body's struggle to extract adequate oxygen from the thin air. Clear, Rodriguez finally whispered as the patrol disappeared behind a distant ridge line. They're moving away from our objective area. The team resumed movement toward their first waypoint, a concealed observation post where they would establish their base of operations for the 2-week mission. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they climbed higher into the mountains, loose scree slopes, and steep rock faces requiring careful navigation to avoid creating noise that could betray their position. After 4 hours of continuous movement, Specialist Chen suddenly stumbled and went down hard, his left ankle twisting unnaturally as it caught between 2 loose rocks. The sharp intake of breath and muffled curse indicated significant pain, possibly a serious injury. Medic, Morrison called quietly, using hand signals to bring Maria forward while maintaining noise discipline. Maria quickly moved to Chen's position and began her assessment of the injury. His ankle was already beginning to swell, and she could see him grimacing with pain as he tried to put weight on the affected foot. "Where does it hurt?" Maria asked, her hands moving carefully over Chen's ankle and lower leg. feeling for signs of fracture or severe soft tissue damage. Right here, Chen replied through gritted teeth, pointing to the lateral aspect of his ankle. I felt something pop when it twisted, and now I can't put any weight on it. Maria continued her examination, testing the range of motion and checking for signs of fracture. The ankle was definitely sprained, possibly severely, but she didn't detect any obvious bone damage. Still, without X-ray capability, she couldn't rule out a small fracture. "Can you wiggle your toes?" she asked, testing for nerve function in the injured foot. Chen moved his toes normally, which was encouraging. Sensation appeared intact, and circulation seemed adequate based on the color and temperature of his foot. The injury was serious, but probably not mission-ending if properly managed. Sergeant Thompson, Morrison called to the team's sniper, "Establish overwatch while Santos treats Chen's ankle." Thompson immediately moved to a position where he could observe the surrounding terrain for threats while Maria worked on Chen's injury. The team's security procedures were automatic, ingrained through countless training exercises and real-world operations. Maria opened her medical kit and removed the supplies she needed for treating a severe ankle sprain. "Chen, I'm going to immobilize your ankle with a compression wrap and give you some pain medication. You'll be able to walk, but it's going to hurt. Can I continue the mission?" Chen asked, his primary concern focused on the team's objectives rather than his personal comfort. "With proper support and pain management, yes," Maria replied as she began wrapping Chen's ankle with an elastic bandage. "But we'll need to monitor for increased swelling and signs of complications." Morrison watched the treatment process with professional interest, evaluating both the injury and Maria's response to their first medical challenge. Her assessment was thorough, her treatment appropriate, and her bedside manner exactly what was needed to maintain team morale. "How long for the treatment?" Morrison asked, aware that they were exposed and vulnerable while stationary in enemy territory. 2 more minutes, Maria replied, applying the final layers of the compression wrap. "I'm giving him an anti-inflammatory injection and some oral pain medication that should last about 6 hours." Chen tested the wrapped ankle carefully, putting gradual weight on the injured foot. The support from Maria's bandaging technique was excellent, providing stability while still allowing controlled movement. "That feels much better," Chen said with obvious relief. "I can definitely continue with the mission." Maria packed her medical supplies efficiently, ensuring that everything was properly secured for continued movement. "Chen, I want to check your ankle again in 2 hours. If the swelling increases or the pain gets worse, we may need to reconsider your mission status." The team resumed movement toward their objective, but Maria noticed that Chun was favoring his injured ankle despite the pain medication. She made a mental note to monitor his condition closely and be prepared for the possibility that his injury might worsen as the mission progressed. The observation post was located in a cave system that provided excellent concealment while offering commanding views of the valley below. Previous reconnaissance teams had established basic infrastructure in the cave, including communication equipment and supply caches that would support extended operations. As the team settled into their temporary base, Maria established a medical treatment area in a side chamber of the cave system. The space was cramped and poorly lit, but it provided privacy for treating injuries and conducting medical examinations. "Santos," Morrison called as she organized her medical supplies. "I want you to conduct a complete physical assessment of every team member. The altitude and physical demands of this mission will stress everyone's systems." The request made perfect sense from a medical standpoint. High-altitude operations placed additional strain on cardiovascular and respiratory systems, and early identification of problems could prevent serious complications later in the mission. Maria spent the next 2 hours examining each soldier, checking vital signs, assessing hydration status, and evaluating their adjustment to high-altitude conditions. Several team members showed early signs of altitude sickness, mild headaches, slight nausea, and elevated heart rates, but nothing serious enough to threaten mission capability. Overall assessment. Morrison asked as Maria completed her examinations. "Everyone is adjusting well to the altitude," Maria replied, reviewing her notes. 3 soldiers have mild altitude sickness symptoms, but they should resolve within 24 to 48 hours as acclimatization occurs. Chin's ankle is stable but needs continued monitoring. Morrison nodded approvingly. Any recommendations for preventing problems over the next 2 weeks? Aggressive hydration, gradual increase in activity levels for the first few days, and careful monitoring for signs of high-altitude pulmonary or cerebral edema, Maria replied. I also recommend rest periods during the most physically demanding operations to prevent overexertion. The medical planning session was interrupted by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who entered the cave with an urgent expression on his weathered face. Colonel, we've got a problem. Intelligence reports indicate increased enemy activity in our operational area. Large patrol formations moving toward our position. Morrison immediately shifted into tactical planning mode, gathering his team leaders to assess the threat and develop response options. The mission timeline might need to be accelerated if enemy forces were converging on their location. How large are these patrol formations? Morrison asked, studying the tactical map that Rodriguez had spread on the cave floor. At least platoon strength, maybe company size, Rodriguez replied. Multiple groups moving in coordinated search patterns. They may have detected our insertion or received intelligence about our presence. The situation was becoming more dangerous by the hour. If enemy forces had identified their general location, the team would need to either relocate immediately or prepare for potential combat operations while maintaining their surveillance mission. Santos, Morrison said, turning to Maria, if we have to move quickly, can Chun handle extended movement on that ankle? Maria considered the question carefully, balancing medical concerns against operational requirements. With additional pain medication and ankle support, he can probably handle moderate movement. Extended forced marches or running would be problematic. Morrison made his decision with the swift decisiveness that characterized effective special operations leaders. We'll establish alternate observation positions and be prepared to relocate if necessary. Rodriguez set up watch schedules and prepare contingency routes. Over the next 6 hours, the team maintained vigilant surveillance of their surroundings while monitoring enemy movement patterns through advanced reconnaissance equipment. Maria used the time to treat several minor medical issues that had developed during their initial movement into the operational area. Sergeant Williams developed a severe headache that was significantly worse than typical altitude sickness symptoms, requiring careful evaluation for signs of high-altitude cerebral edema. Maria conducted a thorough neurological examination, checking his coordination, reflexes, and cognitive function for signs of brain swelling. Follow my finger with your eyes, Maria instructed Williams as she tested his ocular tracking abilities. Don't move your head, just follow with your eyes. Williams' eye movements were normal, and his coordination tests showed no signs of impairment. His headache was severe, but probably represented an unusually strong altitude sickness response rather than dangerous cerebral edema. I'm going to give you medication for the headache and monitor you closely, Maria told Williams. If you develop confusion, difficulty walking, or vision changes, let me know immediately. The medication provided significant relief for Williams' symptoms, but Maria continued to check on him every 2 hours throughout the evening. High-altitude medical emergencies could develop rapidly, and constant vigilance was essential for early detection and treatment. As darkness fell over the mountain peaks, the team settled into their surveillance routine. Maria established a schedule for medical checks, ensuring that every soldier's condition was evaluated regularly without interfering with their operational duties. Around midnight, the team's radio operator received an encrypted message from headquarters that changed the entire dynamic of their mission. Intelligence sources had identified a high-value target in their operational area, a senior Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks throughout the region. Morrison gathered his team leaders for an emergency planning session to assess the new mission parameters. The surveillance mission had suddenly become a potential direct action operation against one of the most wanted terrorists in Afghanistan. The target is expected to visit a compound in our surveillance sector within the next 48 hours, Morrison explained, pointing to aerial photographs of the suspected location. This is an opportunity we can't pass up, but it significantly increases the risk level of our mission. The compound was located in a valley position that would require the team to descend from their current observation post and move through potentially hostile territory. The tactical challenges were significant, but the value of eliminating this particular target outweighed the increased risks. Medical considerations? Morrison asked, looking at Maria. Moving to lower altitude will actually improve everyone's physical condition, Maria replied. But increased activity levels and potential combat operations will place additional stress on the team. Chin's ankle could become a limiting factor if we need to move quickly. Morrison studied the tactical situation carefully, weighing operational requirements against team capabilities. Santos, what would Chin need to participate in a direct action mission? Maria considered the question from both medical and operational perspectives. Additional pain medication, enhanced ankle support, and possibly a local anesthetic injection to temporarily eliminate pain sensation. He could function normally for several hours, but there would be risks. What kind of risks? Morrison asked, wanting a complete understanding of the medical implications. Further injury to the ankle if he can't feel pain signals, Maria explained. Possible long-term damage if he pushes too hard on an already compromised joint. But for a short-duration mission, the risks are manageable. Morrison turned to Chun, who had been listening to the medical assessment of his condition. Chun, can you handle a direct action mission on that ankle? Absolutely, sir. Chun replied without hesitation. Whatever Sergeant Santos needs to do to get me mission ready, I'm good with it. The dedication and professionalism of the Delta operators never ceased to amaze Maria. Despite significant pain and potential long-term consequences, Chin was willing to do whatever was necessary to support the team's mission objectives. Santos, prepare Chin for enhanced pain management, Morrison ordered. We'll finalize mission planning based on his capability assessment after treatment. Maria spent the next hour preparing a comprehensive pain management protocol for Chun that would allow him to participate in the direct action mission. The treatment plan included multiple medications and therapeutic techniques designed to maximize function while minimizing risks. Chun, I'm going to inject a local anesthetic around your ankle that will eliminate pain sensation for about 4 hours, Maria explained as she prepared the injection. You'll need to be extremely careful not to injure yourself further because you won't feel pain signals. Chin nodded his understanding. Just give me whatever I need to do my job, document. The injection procedure required precise placement of the anesthetic medication around the nerve pathways that supplied sensation to Chin's injured ankle. Maria had practiced the technique extensively during her advanced training, but performing it under field conditions with limited lighting was challenging. You should start feeling numbness in about 5 minutes, Maria said as she completed the injection. Test your mobility gradually, and let me know if you experience any unexpected sensations. As Chun tested his enhanced mobility, Maria prepared contingency medical supplies for the potential direct action mission. Combat operations could produce casualties requiring immediate treatment, and she needed to be prepared for multiple trauma scenarios with limited supplies and no evacuation capability. The mission planning session continued through the early morning hours as the team developed detailed procedures for approaching the target compound, eliminating the high-value target, and extracting to safety. Maria's medical input was integrated throughout the planning process, ensuring that casualty treatment and evacuation procedures were thoroughly considered. If we take casualties during the mission, Morrison said during the final planning review, what are our medical options? I can treat severe trauma in the field, Maria replied. But anything requiring extensive surgery would need evacuation to a proper medical facility. Given our location and communication limitations, that could take several hours even in the best-case scenario. Morrison nodded grimly. Special operations missions always involve calculated risks, and medical support was just one factor in complex decision-making processes that balanced mission importance against soldier safety. Santos, you'll accompany the assault team to provide immediate medical support, Morrison decided. Your aid station will be established at the Overwatch position where you can treat casualties and coordinate evacuation if necessary. The assignment meant that Maria would be closer to potential combat action than during her previous experience at the forward operating base. She would be responsible for treating casualties under fire, possibly performing life-saving procedures while enemy forces attempted to kill her and her patients. As dawn broke over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-covered summits in shades of gold and pink, Maria completed her final preparations for the direct action mission. Her medical equipment was organized for rapid deployment, her treatment protocols were memorized, and her mind was focused on the challenges ahead. Chen tested his treated ankle one final time, walking normally with no apparent pain or limitation. The local anesthetic had been completely effective, providing him with full mobility for the upcoming mission. "How does it feel?" Maria asked, evaluating his gait and movement patterns. "Perfect," Chen replied with a smile. "I can't feel any pain at all. It's like the injury never happened." Maria made a final note in her medical log about Chen's treatment and prognosis. The enhanced pain management would allow him to participate in the mission, but she would need to monitor his condition carefully to prevent further injury to the compromised ankle. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison gathered the team for their final mission briefing before moving out toward the target compound. The operation would test every aspect of their training, their equipment, and their ability to operate as a coordinated unit under extreme stress. "Gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice carrying the weight of command responsibility. "Today we have the opportunity to eliminate one of the most dangerous terrorist leaders in this region. Success will save countless coalition and civilian lives. Failure is not an option." The soldiers listened with the focused attention that characterized elite military professionals preparing for combat. Each man understood his role in the complex operation, knew his responsibilities to the team, and was prepared to risk his life for mission success. As the team prepared to move out from their mountain observation post toward the valley below, Maria felt the familiar combination of nervousness and excitement that preceded dangerous operations. She had trained for years to provide medical support in exactly this type of situation, and now her skills would face their ultimate test. The Green Medic, who had been doubted just weeks earlier, was about to accompany one of the most elite military units in the world on a high-risk combat mission deep in enemy territory. Her medical expertise would be essential to bringing every soldier home alive, regardless of what dangers they faced in the valley below. The descent from the mountain observation post required 3 hours of careful movement through loose rock and steep terrain that tested every soldier's physical conditioning and tactical skills. Maria stayed in the middle of the patrol formation, her medical equipment carefully secured to prevent noise that could compromise their approach to the target compound. The valley floor was a patchwork of terraced fields and irrigation ditches that provided excellent concealment, but also created multiple opportunities for enemy observation and ambush positions. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison led the team through the complex terrain with the confidence of a soldier who had navigated similar environments dozens of times during his career. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, serving as point man for the patrol, suddenly raised his closed fist to signal an immediate halt. Every soldier dropped to a concealed position among the rocks and vegetation that lined the valley floor, weapons ready, senses alert for whatever threat Rodriguez had detected. "Two guards at the compound entrance," Rodriguez whispered into his radio microphone, armed with AK-47s and apparently alert. No other visible security, but there could be additional personnel inside the buildings. Morrison crawled forward to Rodriguez's position and studied the target compound through high-powered binoculars. The intelligence reports had been accurate. The facility matched the described layout exactly, with thick mud brick walls surrounding several buildings arranged around a central courtyard. "I count 3 buildings inside the compound," Morrison whispered to his team leaders. "Main residence, storage structure, and what appears to be a guard quarters. No vehicles visible, but there are fresh tire tracks leading to the main building." The presence of recent vehicle activity suggested that the high-value target might already be at the compound, making immediate action necessary to prevent his escape. Morrison made the tactical decision to accelerate their timeline and prepare for immediate assault operations. "Santos," Morrison called quietly, gesturing for Maria to move forward to his position. "Establish your aid station at the overwatch position. You'll have good visibility of the compound and protected approaches for casualty evacuation." Maria moved carefully to the designated position, a small depression behind a low stone wall that provided excellent concealment while offering clear views of the target area. She organized her medical equipment for rapid deployment, positioning trauma supplies for immediate access during potential casualty treatment. The overwatch position was approximately 200 meters from the compound walls, close enough to provide effective covering fire for the assault team, but far enough away to avoid direct involvement in close-quarters combat operations. Maria would be able to observe the entire mission and respond quickly if medical support became necessary. Sergeant First Class Thompson, the team's designated marksman, established his sniper position adjacent to Maria's aid station. His advanced rifle system and telescopic sight would provide precision fire support during the assault phase, eliminating specific threats while avoiding civilian casualties. Santos, Thompson said as he settled into his firing position, "If we start taking casualties, I'll provide covering fire while you work on the wounded. Stay low and move fast. This position will draw enemy attention once the shooting starts." Maria nodded her understanding while continuing to organize her medical supplies for different casualty scenarios. Penetrating trauma from rifle rounds, explosive injuries from grenades, burns from incendiary devices. She needed to be prepared for any type of combat injury that could occur during urban assault operations. Morrison divided his assault team into two elements that would approach the compound from different directions, creating tactical flexibility while maintaining coordinated fire support. The complex operation required precise timing and flawless execution to succeed without friendly casualties. Assault teams, this is Overlord. Morrison spoke into his radio microphone, using the prearranged call sign for mission command. Target compound is confirmed occupied. Initiate approach phase on my signal. The two assault elements began their careful approach toward the compound walls, using available concealment to avoid detection by the guards at the main entrance. Maria watched their movement through binoculars, mentally rehearsing casualty treatment procedures while monitoring the developing tactical situation. Specialist Chun, despite his injured ankle, moved with the smooth efficiency that characterized Delta Force operators. The local anesthetic injection that Maria had administered was completely effective, allowing him to function normally despite the significant joint damage he had sustained during the mountain approach. Overlord, this is Alpha Team, came the whispered radio transmission from the left assault element. In position at the north wall, ready for breach operations. Overlord, this is Bravo Team, replied the right assault element. In position at the south wall, explosive charges set, and ready for simultaneous breach. Morrison studied the compound through his binoculars one final time, ensuring that both assault